The war between humanity and the Seraph Dominion had been raging for years. The Seraph, a race of giant insect-like creatures, had swept across the galaxy, conquering planet after planet. Their strength was unmatched, their technology advanced, and their numbers were vast. Yet, despite their overwhelming power, humanity stood firm. They had pushed back the Seraph time and time again, defending their colonies and eventually forcing the alien invaders to negotiate. After countless battles, Queen Valith IV of the Seraph called for a ceasefire. She wanted peace, and the Seraph seemed to accept it, tired of the constant fighting. However, no one knew that Queen Valith was hiding a dark secret. Her heart, both figuratively and literally, was failing. The Seraph, like all insect species, were governed by a shared hive mind. The queen was the heart of this hive, controlling everything and everyone. But Valith IV's heart core, a mysterious organ deep inside her chest, had started to break down. It wasn't just a biological problem. It was a collapse of the entire system that had held the Seraph together for centuries. Without her heart core functioning properly, Valith IV could no longer maintain control over her people. The hive mind was slipping out of her reach, and the Seraph began to fall into chaos. If she died, her people would be left leaderless, and the Dominion would collapse into civil war. And with the war still not fully over, the danger of humanity's enemies turning back to their old ways was terrifying. The Seraph Council, in desperation, sent an urgent message to the human government. Dr. Elias Carter, a human doctor and one of the rare Genjigo biosurgeons, was their only hope. The Genjigo were humans trained to repair even the most complex alien biology, and Dr. Carter was one of the best. He was known for his unique ability to understand life in all its forms, but no one expected him to be the one to save a Seraph queen. When Dr. Carter received the call, he had doubts. He had never worked on a species as alien as the Seraph, but the need for peace, for an end to the war, was too great. He agreed to come to Seraph Prime, the homeworld of the Seraph, to attempt the impossible, save the life of their queen. As he traveled to Seraph Prime, Dr. Carter couldn't help but wonder what he would face. The Seraph were cold, calculating, and proud. To them, a human was nothing more than a lesser species, weak and insignificant. Would they even let him close to their queen? Or would they turn on him before he had the chance to help? The fate of the galaxy rested on his shoulders. Dr. Elias Carter arrived on Seraph Prime under heavy security. The planet was dark and foreboding, with jagged landscapes and towering spires that looked more like ancient monuments than modern structures. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of strange chemicals and the buzz of alien technology. The Seraph had made their home here for centuries, and it was clear they were a proud, unyielding people. Carter was escorted through the winding corridors of the royal palace, a massive structure made of black stone and glowing with faint purple light. As he walked, the buzzing whispers of the Seraph hive mind filled the air, disjointed and fragmented. The palace was alive with the hum of their thoughts, a constant reminder that he was in the presence of beings who shared a collective consciousness. He couldn't help but feel like an outsider, a small human in a sea of towering insect-like beings. The Seraph guards around him eyed him with suspicion, their many compound eyes focusing on him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. To them, humans were weak, insignificant creatures. Yet they had no choice but to trust him. He was their last hope. Dr. Carter had spent years studying alien biology, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead. The Seraph Queen, Valith IV, was unlike any being he had ever encountered. She was both the ruler and the heart of her people, her heart core controlling not only her own life, but the very mind of the Seraph. If it failed, the entire hive would crumble. As Carter entered the Queen's chamber, he could feel the weight of her presence. Valith IV sat upon a throne made of living, pulsating material, her long, segmented body shimmering in the dim light. Her wings, folded against her back, were like delicate webs of crystal. Despite her alien appearance, there was an undeniable beauty to her. a terrifying, otherworldly elegance that sent a shiver down Carter's spine. Her eyes, dark and depthless, locked onto him as he stepped forward. For a moment, there was silence. The hive mind seemed to pause, the buzzing voices fading into the background. Carter could feel the weight of the Queen's gaze, as though she were examining him, testing his resolve. "I am Valith, Queen of the Sereth Dominion." Her voice rang in his mind, clear and commanding. "You are the human who will attempt the impossible. Do not fail me." Carter bowed his head, trying to remain calm. He had dealt with powerful people before, but this was different. The Sereth were not just powerful. They were ancient, with knowledge and strength beyond anything humanity had ever known. "I will do everything I can, Your Majesty," Carter replied, his voice steady, but filled with uncertainty. "But I must know what is causing your heart core to fail. The process is complicated, and I cannot help you unless I understand what I'm dealing with." Valith's eyes flickered with something like amusement, though her face remained unreadable. "You are not the first to try, human, but you are the only one I trust. Do what you must." As Carter prepared for the surgery, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just saving a life. If he failed, it wouldn't just be the end of a queen. It would be the end of the Sereth Dominion. And without the Sereth, the fragile peace between humanity and the Sereth would shatter, plunging the galaxy back into war. The stakes couldn't be higher. Carter only hoped he was ready for what was to come. Dr. Elias Carter stood in the heart of the Sereth royal chamber, preparing for a task that felt impossible. He was surrounded by Sereth warriors and officials, tall, imposing figures who seemed to study him with every move. Their eyes, dark and numerous, were focused on him like silent, judging sentinels. Carter couldn't help but feel the weight of their gaze, the silent question hanging in the air. Would he fail? Queen Valith sat motionless on her living throne, her alien form both majestic and intimidating. Despite her apparent calm, there was a quiet, palpable tension in the room. Carter could feel it like an electric charge in the air. The stakes were high, and the Sereth were not forgiving of failure. As he examined the equipment around him, he couldn't help but feel the difference between this and the surgeries he had done back on Earth. The tools, the machines, and even the medical procedures were all designed for alien biology, far more complex than anything humanity had ever dealt with. The Sereth had already tried numerous methods to save their queen, but each attempt had failed. Now, it was his turn. Failure was not an option. He turned to one of the Sereth medical officers, a creature whose face was a mix of insect-like features and sharp geometric patterns. The officer's voice hummed in his mind, a soft, eerie buzz that spoke directly into Carter's thoughts. "You have one chance, human. One chance to save our queen. Do not waste it." Carter nodded, though he didn't feel confident. He had seen the Sereth as a powerful species, ruthless, cold, and precise in everything they did. Trusting a human to save their queen was not something they did lightly. They had tried other methods, and every single one had failed. But now, they had placed all their hopes in him. "Understood," Carter replied, his voice steady despite the swirling nerves in his stomach. He turned back to the queen, his eyes briefly meeting hers. There was no emotion in her gaze, only a cold, calculating look that made it clear she would not tolerate failure. The hive mind of the Sereth was alive, like a vast web of thoughts and commands that stretched across the entire planet. But as Carter prepared for the surgery, he realized something was wrong. The hive was quiet, unnervingly so. It was as if the Sereth were holding their collective breath, waiting for him to make his move. Carter placed his hands on the strange device that was meant to stabilize Queen Valith's heart core. The process was delicate. He could feel the heartbeat of the queen, a strange, rhythmic pulse that seemed to thrum with the power of the entire Sereth race. But as his hands connected with the device, a sharp, disorienting surge of energy jolted through his body. It was as if something was pushing back, rejecting his touch. The heart core was alive, but it was dying. Carter could feel it struggle, as if it was fighting for control, for the right to exist. Something was deeply wrong, and it wasn't just a physical failure. The core seemed to be rejecting the intervention of the humans entirely. It's trying to kill her, Carter thought, his mind racing. There was something deeper at play here, something he couldn't yet understand. But he couldn't stop. The Queen's life, and the fate of the galaxy, was in his hands. With determination, Carter pushed forward, knowing that one wrong move could destroy everything. Trust had been given to him, and now he had no choice but to succeed. The tension in the room was unbearable. Dr. Elias Carter stood in front of the Queen, his mind racing as he prepared for a procedure that seemed like it could destroy everything. The Seraph guards, their eyes fixed on him, waited in silence. They weren't just watching out of curiosity. They were watching for failure. And Carter could feel the weight of that expectation with every heartbeat. He had never worked on anything like this before. The Seraph were an insectoid species, their biology both alien and complex. Their bodies were made up of multiple layers of exoskeletons, organic tissue, and strange biotech that Carter could barely comprehend. The Queen herself was more than just an individual. She was the heart of the Seraph, a living core that controlled the entire hive mind. If her heart core failed, so would everything. Her death would trigger a catastrophic collapse, a fracture that would tear the Dominion apart. But Carter's job wasn't just to save her life. It was to restore the balance of an entire species, something no human had ever been asked to do before. His hand shook as he adjusted the medical equipment, tools that were designed for alien surgeries. The instruments were strange to him, alien in shape, but he had studied them for days. He had no choice. The Queen's heart core was slowly disintegrating, and the longer he waited, the more the Seraph hive mind faltered. The situation was critical. If he didn't act now, it might be too late. Carter took a deep breath. His mind flashed back to his training. The years of studying alien biology, the countless surgeries he had performed back on Earth, but nothing prepared him for the complexity of what lay ahead. "Start the procedure," Carter commanded, his voice calm but firm. A Seraph medical officer, one of the few who had worked with humans, activated the surgical machines. As the tools hummed to life, a deep vibration filled the air. Carter felt the energy pulse in his fingertips, a strange and powerful force coming from the Queen's heart core. It was alive, but in a way he had never experienced before. The energy felt almost like a living entity, pushing against him. The Queen's wings fluttered slightly, as if she could feel the presence of the strange human technology around her. Her expression remained unreadable, her thoughts hidden deep within the hive mind. But Carter knew she was aware. She was aware of him, of what he was about to do. Carefully, he placed his hands on the cold metal of the heart core interface. The device was designed to stabilize and regulate the pulse of the Queen's heart. It was linked to her very life force, her connection to the hive. As his fingers brushed against the surface, a violent surge of energy shot through him. The pulse from the heart core intensified, like a heartbeat gone wild, pushing him back. Carter gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay in place. The Seraph were watching him, waiting. They didn't speak, but their thoughts pressed against him, a silent demand for success. Failure was not an option. Carter's eyes narrowed as he focused. This wasn't just about physical surgery. It was about understanding an alien intelligence far beyond anything he had ever encountered. The Seraph heart core was not merely an organ. It was a nexus of consciousness, a living link to the entire hive. If he made even one mistake, it could sever the connection and destroy Valith 4 forever. He adjusted the instruments again, forcing the device to interface with the heart core. Sweat dripped down his brow, but he remained focused. The operation had begun, and there was no turning back. The humming of the surgical equipment was the only sound in the sterile, dimly lit room. Dr. Elias Carter was deep in concentration, his hand steady as he continued to work on Queen Valith 4's heart core. The pulse from the organ was erratic, violent at times, but Carter had managed to keep it stable for now. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he focused all his energy on the delicate procedure. Every moment counted. The Seraph warriors and medical officers stood around the room, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for a sign that he could succeed where others had failed. Carter didn't have the luxury of failure. The entire fate of the Seraph Dominion, and perhaps the future of peace between humans and the Seraph, depended on this moment. But just as Carter felt he was making progress, a sudden, sharp noise broke the silence, a loud crash, followed by the shouts of Seraph guards. Carter turned his head just in time to see a dark figure darting from the shadows of the chamber. A Seraph general, Sci-Fi, had broken into the room. His insectoid body was massive and imposing, his wings flickering in the air as he moved with incredible speed. The general's expression was one of fury, his compound eyes narrowed in hatred. "Step away from the queen." Sci-Fi's voice roared in Carter's mind, his words harsh and filled with anger. "You dare to meddle with the heart of the Seraph. I will not allow it." Carter froze. His heart raced as he realized what was happening. Sci-Fi was not here to help. He was here to stop the procedure. The general's power within the Seraph hierarchy was immense. If he succeeded in killing the queen now, there would be no hope for peace. The Seraph would fall into chaos, and the war with humanity would likely resume. Carter's mind raced. He needed to act quickly, but his hands were still on the queen's heart core, unable to pull away without risking fatal damage. His eyes flicked to the Seraph warriors standing guard. Some of them hesitated, unsure of which side to take. The power struggle in the room was clear, and the tension was unbearable. Sci-Fi's wings buzzed as he stepped closer, eyes flashing with fury. "You think you can save her, human? You think your weak, pathetic species can undo what nature has done? I will not allow it." Carter's voice was calm but firm as he met the general's gaze. "If you kill her now, you doom your people. I'm trying to save the queen, not destroy her." But Sci-Fi wasn't listening. With a roar, the general launched himself forward, his claws extended, ready to strike. Carter's mind raced. He knew he couldn't fight Sci-Fi physically, but he could use the technology around him. He glanced at the surgical tools and quickly pressed a button on the control panel, activating the security shields around the operating table. The Seraph general was forced to halt, his body slammed against an invisible barrier with a loud thud. "Stay back, Sci-Fi," Carter said, his voice low, warning, "If you want to save your queen, you'll have to trust me. The heart core is failing. Without me, she will die." For a brief moment, the room fell silent. Sci-Fi stood frozen, his sharp eyes searching Carter's face for any sign of weakness. The Seraph warriors watched, unsure of whether to side with their general or the human. Carter didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. Time was running out. If the procedure wasn't completed soon, the queen's heart core would fail. And with it, the last chance for peace. The air in the chamber was thick with tension. Sci-Fi had been forced to back off, but his eyes still burned with suspicion and anger. Carter could feel the weight of the general's gaze on him, like a cold, dangerous presence just waiting for a reason to strike. The Seraph warriors and medical officers stood still, unsure of how to react. For a brief moment, Carter wondered if he had made a mistake. Should he have trusted the Seraph? Should he have even come to Seraph Prime in the first place? He had never felt more alone in his life. The fate of the queen, and the fragile peace between humans and the Seraph, was in his hands. His fingers hovered above the queen's heart core, the strange, pulsating organ that was the center of everything. The energy within it was both chaotic and powerful, thrumming with life in one moment and threatening to shut down in the next. Carter could feel it struggle, like a drowning creature gasping for air. It was alive, but barely. He had been working on the heart core for what felt like hours, trying to understand its alien structure. But the more he learned, the more complicated things became. It wasn't just a biological failure. It was something deeper, something unnatural. Carter's mind raced as he recalled the strange energy surge that had jolted through him earlier in the procedure. He had thought it was just a reaction from the heart core, but now he realized something was off. There was an outside influence at play here. Someone or something was deliberately sabotaging the Queen's heart core. Could it have been Sci-Fi? The thought crossed his mind. The general had seemed intent on stopping him at all costs. But Carter quickly discarded the idea. Sci-Fi's hatred for humans was clear, but it didn't explain the strange, violent pulse he had felt earlier. This felt like something more. A sudden, sharp vibration from the Queen's heart core snapped Carter back to reality. He felt a cold, eerie presence near him. His heart skipped a beat. It was the hive mind. The Xerath hive mind was reacting to something. It was shifting. The voices that had once been chaotic and disjointed were now in perfect harmony, and the Queen's thoughts, once scattered, seemed to focus entirely on him. Carter could feel the ancient intelligence of the hive, a presence that was both overwhelming and strange, like being lost in a sea of consciousness. "You are not alone, human," came a voice in his mind, soft yet commanding. "The Queen's heart core is a living extension of our consciousness. You may save her, but you must understand her secrets." The voice wasn't from the Queen herself. It was the hive mind, speaking through her. Carter's heart raced as he tried to keep calm. He wasn't sure whether the hive was helping him or testing him, but he knew one thing for certain. He was on the edge of something monumental. The heart core's pulse quickened, growing more intense. It felt like it was reaching out to him, as though it wanted to communicate, to reveal its hidden truths. The energy coursed through him, flowing from his fingertips, connecting him to the very life force of the Xerath. And then, as if on cue, the truth began to emerge. The heart core was failing, but not because of a simple biological issue. The heart core had been tampered with, corrupted from within. A deep, cold voice echoed through the hive mind, a voice Carter recognized. Sci-Fi. Sci-Fi had done this. He had poisoned the heart core, sabotaging it to ensure that the Queen would die. His goal was to take control of the Xerath and destroy the fragile peace that had been established with humanity. Carter's mind spun with the implications. The Xerath Dominion had been betrayed by one of their own, and now Carter was the only one who could stop it. Carter's heart raced as he processed the shocking revelation. Sci-Fi, a trusted Xerath general, had sabotaged the Queen's heart core. The betrayal was not just an attack on the Queen, but on the very foundation of the Xerath Dominion. If Carter didn't act fast, the entire species would collapse under the weight of this treachery. The cold, calculating voice of Sci-Fi echoed in Carter's mind, a dark presence he could no longer ignore. The Xerath general's anger had fueled the sabotage, his desire for power clouding his judgment. The heart core had been tampered with, poisoned from the inside. The Queen's life force was being slowly drained, and with each passing second, the damage grew worse. "She will die." Sci-Fi's voice was laced with venom. "And when she does, I will be the one to rule the Xerath." Carter's hands trembled, but he quickly steadied himself. There was no time to waste. If Sci-Fi had truly poisoned the heart core, the Queen's life was hanging by a thread. The Xerath Dominion would fall into chaos if she died. He had to act, and he had to do it now. He turned to face the Queen, her eyes closed, her body still, yet her mind reached out to him. The hive mind, once a chaotic buzz of thoughts, now focused entirely on him. It was as if the entire Xerath species was watching him, waiting for him to make a choice that would decide their future. Save her. The voice in his mind was the Queen's now, firm and direct. Save the hive. Carter's fingers hovered over the heart core's interface. He had to find a way to cleanse the poison, but the complexity of the organ was beyond anything he had ever encountered. The technology that powered the heart core was like nothing on Earth. Its structure was part biological and part mechanical, making it nearly impossible to fix without risking further damage. But Carter knew that he didn't have the luxury of failure. He had to succeed, or everything would be lost. His mind raced as he quickly scanned the heart core's interface, searching for any sign of what could be done to reverse the damage. The poison had to be neutralized, and the heart core had to be restabilized. But there was a problem. The poison had woven itself deep into the heart core's system, making it nearly impossible to separate from the rest of the organ. Carter's eyes widened as he saw something, a faint signal flashing on the screen. It was a hidden control, buried deep within the heart core's programming. Whoever had tampered with it had tried to cover their tracks, but they hadn't accounted for Carter's understanding of alien technology. This was his chance. His mind raced as he quickly activated the control, sending a pulse of energy into the heart core. For a moment, nothing happened. The heart core's pulse continued to beat erratically, and Carter's heart sank. Had he failed? Then, slowly, a change began. The energy he had sent through the system seemed to be working. The erratic pulses began to stabilize, and the poison's influence started to fade. Carter's breath caught in his throat as he watched the heart core come back to life. But it wasn't over yet. The poison had been removed, but the heart core still needed to be fully healed. Carter had only bought the Queen a little time. Now he had to complete the process. As he worked, the voice of the Queen spoke again, softer now. "You have saved me, human. But beware. Psychath 7 will stop at nothing to see me fall." Carter's determination grew. He would not let the Seraph fall into the hands of a traitor. The operation wasn't over, and neither was the fight. The chamber was silent, save for the soft hum of the machinery that kept Queen Valith-4's heart core alive. Carter's hands moved quickly but carefully, manipulating the delicate controls. Every second counted. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. Psychath 7's betrayal had nearly destroyed the Queen, but Carter had managed to reverse the worst of the poison. Now he had only one task left: to heal the heart core and restore balance to the Seraph. He could feel the weight of the hive mind pressing in around him, as if the entire Seraph species was watching him, waiting. Their lives depended on this moment. If the Queen died, the hive would splinter, and the fragile peace between humans and the Seraph would crumble. Failure was not an option, but the danger was far from over. As the poison receded, Carter's hands trembled with the knowledge that the worst was yet to come. The Queen's heart core was still fragile, and though the poison had been removed, there was deep internal damage. The heart core was no longer stable, and he knew he had to act quickly before it failed completely. "You are doing well, human." The voice of Queen Valith-4 echoed in his mind again, calm and reassuring. "But you must hurry. Psychath 7 will not give up so easily." Carter swallowed hard. The Queen's voice seemed to have more strength now, but the warning was clear. Psychath 7 was still out there, and he was likely planning his next move. He glanced over at the Seraph guards in the room, their ice cold and unreadable. There was no sign of Psychath 7, but Carter knew that he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The traitor could strike at any moment. Carter turned back to the heart core, his focus narrowing. The interface was responding, but just barely. The system was still unstable, the pulse flickering in and out. His hand shook with exhaustion, but he had no time to rest. Every moment felt like a battle, and the Queen's life was slipping away with each passing second. A sudden vibration beneath his fingers jolted him, and for a moment, he thought the heart core had given out. But then, a faint, steady rhythm began to emerge. It was slow at first, but it was there. The heart core was responding, coming back to life. "It is working, human." The Queen's voice was stronger now, a note of hope in it. "You are saving us." Carter smiled, though he knew he couldn't celebrate yet. The Queen was still in danger, and the heart core needed more time to heal fully. But he felt a surge of hope, a small victory in the middle of this impossible situation. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the entrance of the chamber. Carter's heart stopped. The doors had been thrown open, and there stood Psychath 7, his wings buzzing in fury, eyes blazing with rage. "You fool. Psychath 7's voice rang out in Carter's mind, venomous and full of hatred. You think you can save her? You think your kind has the power to stop me? The traitor moved forward, his claws bared, ready to destroy everything Carter had worked for. Carter's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. He couldn't let Psychath 7 stop him now. I will stop you, Psychath 7, Carter said, his voice cold and determined. You've already failed once, and you'll fail again. Psychath 7's wings flared in anger as he lunged at Carter, but just as quickly, the Zereth guard stepped forward, blocking his path. There was a moment of hesitation, and then, as if by some silent command, they raised their weapons in unison. For a second, Psychath 7 seemed unsure. The betrayal had been revealed, and the Zereth were not willing to let him tear apart everything they had built. This is not your battle anymore, Psychath 7, one of the guards said, his voice low and firm. You are a traitor to the hive. Carter didn't have time to watch the confrontation. His hands were still on the hardcore, and he needed to finish what he had started. The heart rate was becoming more stable, but the queen was still weak. Stay with me, queen. I won't let you fall. As the Zereth general was subdued, Carter gave one final push. The hardcore's pulse grew steady, its rhythm strong, and for the first time since he began, Carter allowed himself to breathe. The queen's voice was clear in his mind. You have saved us, human. The hive will remember this. But as Carter looked at the Zereth warriors, their cold stares now softened with gratitude, he knew that the fight wasn't over. There would always be those who sought power, but for now, the peace was intact. Carter stood in the dim light of the chamber, his hand still hovering over the hardcore. The pulse was steady now, strong even. It was a victory, but it felt incomplete. The queen had been saved, the sabotage reversed, and Psychath 7 was temporarily subdued. Yet Carter could feel that something wasn't right. A shadow still lingered in the air, one that he couldn't quite place. The Zereth warriors had taken Psychath 7 away, their weapons lowered but their faces hard with suspicion. They knew, as Carter did, that their general was a traitor. His actions had betrayed them all. Yet they also knew that the threat wasn't over. Not as long as there were enemies lurking in the shadows. Carter wiped his brow, exhaustion weighing down on him. He had done what no one else had been able to do. He had saved the queen, the life force of the Zereth Dominion, and in doing so had averted an all-out war. But in the depths of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger had only just begun. The voice of the queen echoed in his mind again, calm and steady. You have done more than we could have hoped, human. The hive owes you its life. Carter's heart skipped a beat. The queen's words were genuine, full of gratitude, but he could hear something else, something unsettling in her tone. It was as if she were warning him. He looked at the hardcore, now glowing softly, its rhythm steady like a heartbeat that was once lost but now found. But even as the queen's life force seemed restored, a question gnawed at him. How could Psychath 7, someone so high in rank, have been allowed to sabotage the hive without being noticed? The answer hit him like a bolt of lightning. Psychath 7 was not the only traitor. His mind flashed back to the earlier moments in the chamber when he had felt the hive mind stir, when he had felt the faint, dark pulse running through the hardcore, more like a sickness than a simple malfunction. Psychath 7 might have initiated the sabotage, but someone had enabled him. There was someone higher up who had been working in the shadows, pulling strings to ensure the queen's downfall. Carter's stomach turned. He could feel the weight of this new discovery pressing on him. The Zereth warriors, despite their loyalty, were still at risk. If someone within the Dominion's inner circle was orchestrating this, then the entire species was in danger. Worse, the peace between humanity and the Zereth could shatter in an instant if this new threat was not identified and neutralized. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice. Human. He turned to see a Zereth elder stepping into the room. The elder's wings were folded against his back, and his eyes were sharp with both wisdom and concern. "We must talk." The elder's voice carried authority, and Carter immediately recognized the weight of the moment. This was not just another exchange of pleasantries. This was a warning. Without a word, the elder motioned for Carter to follow. He led him out of the operating room and into a long corridor, the walls lined with glowing seraph symbols. The air here felt colder, the silence heavier. "You have done a great service to the Queen, human." The elder spoke in a low voice, his wings twitching slightly as he glanced around. "But your work is not yet finished." Carter's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I thought we stopped Psychath-7." The elder paused, looking around one last time before continuing. "Psychath-7 was the tool. He was the one we could see. But the true enemy lies within the very structure of our dominion." Carter's mind raced. "Are you saying there are more traitors?" The elder nodded slowly. "Yes. The dominion is sick. Psychath-7 was just one of many who have been corrupted. Someone higher, much higher, has been manipulating the hive for years." Carter's blood ran cold. "Who?" The elder hesitated, and for the first time, Carter saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "I don't know yet, but I will find out. And when I do, you'll need to be ready." Carter's hands clenched into fists. His work wasn't over, and the real battle was just beginning. Carter's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as he followed the elder deeper into the seraph stronghold. Each word the elder had spoken seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the last. The dominion was sick, infected from the inside out. Psychath-7 had been only a symptom of the disease, and the true enemy was still out there, hiding in the shadows. He couldn't help but wonder how deep this betrayal went. The Seraph were a proud, powerful species, but if their own leaders were turning on them, what did that mean for the future? What did that mean for the fragile peace that humanity had fought so hard to build with them? The elder's wings twitched nervously as they moved through the hallways, his gaze always darting to the shadows. Carter could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was no longer just a matter of saving the Queen. It was a matter of saving the Seraph Dominion itself. "We are close, human." The elder's voice was low, as though he feared being overheard. "The traitor is not far." Carter nodded, his hand resting on the side of his weapon. He didn't know what they would find, but he was ready. Whoever was behind this, they would pay. They reached a hidden chamber deep in the heart of the stronghold. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room filled with ancient Seraph technology, some of which Carter recognized from his time working with the Queen's heart core. But something felt wrong. The air in the room was thick, oppressive, as though it had been sealed for far too long. Inside, sitting at a console, was a figure shrouded in shadow. Carter's hand went to his weapon, but the elder stopped him with a quiet gesture. "Do not act too hastily." The elder's voice was barely above a whisper. "This is the one." The figure turned slowly, revealing a face Carter knew all too well. It was Vorx-5, the high-ranking Seraph official who had been one of the most vocal supporters of peace with humanity. Carter's breath caught in his throat. He had trusted Vorx-5, had even considered him an ally in the fragile alliance between the Seraph and humans. But now, seeing him in this hidden chamber, his eyes glowing with a dark intensity, Carter knew the truth. Vorx-5 had been the true mastermind behind the sabotage. He had manipulated Psychath-7, used him as a pawn to destabilize the Queen, all to seize control of the Seraph Dominion. "You're too late, human." Vorx-5's voice was smooth, confident, but there was an edge to it, a hint of madness that Carter hadn't noticed before. "The Queen's heart core is already beyond saving. And soon, the Dominion will be mine." Carter's fingers tightened around his weapon, but the elder held up a hand, signaling for him to wait. "You don't understand, Vorx-5." The elder's voice was tinged with both sadness and anger. "You've betrayed us all for nothing. The hive cannot be ruled by force. You are blind to the truth." Vorx-5's lips twisted into a cruel smile. The truth. The truth is that the old ways have failed us. Peace with humanity. A lie. Weakness. I will remake the Seraph into something stronger, something greater. The elder stepped forward, his wings unfurling slightly in a gesture of power. You are wrong. The strength of the Seraph lies in unity, not in domination. It lies in our bond with the hive, with each other. HFY's eyes flashed with rage. Enough talk. It's over. With a swift movement, he activated a hidden console, and the room shook violently. The ground beneath them rumbled as an energy pulse surged through the chamber. Carter could feel the destabilizing power crackling in the air. HFY was trying to destroy the heart core for good. Without hesitation, Carter charged. He fired a shot, disabling the console, but it was too late. The room was filling with energy, and the heart core, the last hope of the Seraph Dominion, was now in danger again. No, Carter shouted as he sprinted toward the core. The elder was already there, using his own energy to stabilize the system. But the damage had been done. The core was unstable, and time was running out. HFY smiled one last time before retreating into the shadows, his voice echoing in Carter's mind. You will fail. The Dominion is mine. With every ounce of his strength, Carter focused on the heart core, pulling at the systems, trying to reverse the damage. But the energy was overwhelming, and he could feel the life of the queen, of the entire Seraph species, slipping away. And then, a faint pulse. The queen's voice, stronger than ever before, echoed in Carter's mind. Not yet. With that, Carter pushed one last time, sending a surge of energy into the core. The pulse steadied. The room fell silent. For now, the queen had been saved. But the battle was far from over.